The United Kingdom has imposed sanctions on Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko and some other senior figures in the country over last month's disputed presidential election.
Today, the UK government has imposed sanctions on 8 senior members of the authorities in Belarus, including Alexander Lukashenko, the National Security Advisor, and Lukashenko's Chief of Staff. And it's for the persecution of the protesters and the rigging of the elections in Belarus. We think it's really important to take a stand for human rights and for the values of freedom, and it's important to do so now.
Dominic Raab also accused the Belarusian government of human rights violations. Canada also announced sanctions on the Belarusian administration, citing similar allegations. Earlier, Russian President Vladimir Putin pledged to stand by Belarus, saying that the East European country is facing unprecedented external pressure. Lukashenko won the election with 80% of the vote, but the opposition claims that the vote was rigged, an allegation the government denies. And since then, the country has witnessed many protests which have turned violent. And now joining us for this news review is Marcos Papadopoulos, publisher and editor from Politics First, joining us out of London, and Tony Gosling, investigative journalist, joining us from Bristol. Gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you both to the program. I guess we'll start with you, Tony. Your thoughts on what's going on in Belarus and now the sanctions that have resulted from what's going on in Belarus.
Well, I mean, it's almost a comedy speech from Dominic Raab talking about the persecution of protesters just a few days after his government basically sent the riot police in to shut down a protest against the extreme lockdown measures that have been taking place in Britain on Saturday. This is just a few days ago. He doesn't seem to have a very long memory about persecution of protesters on his own front doorstep. And there's also human rights. He's citing that. Now, it's not within people's human rights to close down demonstrations which are against the government. So he's completely hypocritical in talking in this manner about Lukashenko and personally persecuting him after. And what's his crime supposed to be after winning an election with 80% of the vote? Now, it looks to me as if Dominic Raab and the Foreign Office here in Britain are absolutely desperate, because the guy should be there. Lukashenko's been there for many years. He's won the last 6 or so elections. Why shouldn't he win another one? No one should be so surprised about that. And this is obviously becoming rather similar to the Venezuela situation that we had last year, and to Ukraine when there was a coup in Ukraine. That's an attempt, really, by the Western powers, and usually spearheaded by Britain, I'm afraid, in Europe, in order to try and grab these countries, Ukraine and Belarus, using bribery and intimidation and threats, in order to bring them into the Western sphere of influence and away from the sphere of influence of Putin. And there's no way that the people in Belarus are going to vote for this. So that's why he's had to do this. The actual living conditions, the healthcare conditions, the education conditions in Belarus are excellent compared to many parts of Europe. So why would people vote for that? And so that's, I think, really, this is sour grapes from Dominic Raab here in Britain, because he's had a very successful election. And not only that, the Belarus president, Alexander Lukashenko, he said that the planet has been swept by psychosis over the COVID-19 vaccine. That's exactly what the protesters in London's Trafalgar Square were saying on Saturday. They believe that too. And also, he was saying, with much more humour than any of the British politicians, drink vodka to poison the virus. These sorts of comments are, I think, exactly the sorts of things that many Belarusians would be saying, many British people are saying, and the British government don't like the way that the Belarusians have won so well. 7 times less than Britain death rate. That is to say, the chance of you dying in Belarus was 7 times less than in the UK of COVID-19. So they've had a very successful no lockdown policy. And by the way, he also blew the whistle, didn't he, Lukashenko? He said that the IMF bribed him with about $1 billion in order to impose a lockdown on his people, and he refused to do that. So those are the sorts of reasons, I think, why Dominic Raab has just got sour grapes, because the Belarusians have shamed much of the rest of the world, and particularly Europe, in their successful dealing with the lockdown, and also with him winning his election again and being aligned to the Russians. They don't like it in the West.
Thank you, Tony. And Marcos, I'd like to welcome you to the broadcast here. Mr. Marcos Papadopoulos, your initial thoughts on this?
Well, the decision of the British government to impose sanctions on key Belarusian politicians, including Alexander Lukashenko, are of no significance whatsoever. They are immaterial, because the attempt by America and Britain to orchestrate a coup in Belarus with the objective of turning the country into a vassal state of the West has failed. And indeed, it was destined to fail, because Belarus, or to use its historical name, Belarusia, is de facto a province of the Russian Federation, while the vast majority of the Belarusians consider themselves as Russians and consider themselves as part of the Russian motherland, or as part of the Russian world, a motherland that stretches from Brest to Kamchatka. So there was never any realistic prospect of a Western coup taking place in Belarus. Indeed, within a very short period of time, the Russian military, in tandem with the Belarusian military, sealed Belarus's borders with Ukraine, Poland, and the Baltic states to prevent infiltrators coming in from the aforementioned countries, while Russian special services, working together with their Belarusian counterparts, identified saboteurs, agent provocateurs in Belarus who were acting on the instructions of London and Washington. Now, the one irony of the attempt by the West to instigate a coup in Belarus is that this has given a much needed impetus to efforts by Moscow and Minsk to reunify Belarusia with Russia, because the union state of Russia and Belarus, which was put together by Lukashenko and Boris Yeltsin in the late 1990s, has stalled in recent years, namely because Lukashenko wants to be president of the Union state. In short, he wants to be in the Kremlin. But now that the West has attempted a coup in Belarus, and because Lukashenko, without precedent and quite extraordinarily, has turned to Putin for help, that means that Russia's position in Belarus has increased tenfold, so much so that in recent days, the Russian ambassador in Minsk presented Lukashenko with a map of the Russian Empire with Belarusia highlighted. So it's certainly the case that the reunification of the Russian and Belarusian peoples is going to take place now, sooner rather than later. And that is an unintended consequence of the Americans and the British having attempted a coup in Belarus. We have to remember that the Belarusian people never wanted to be separated from Russia. In March 1991, over 80% of the Belarusian people voted to preserve the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was dissolved because of the wishes of three politicians: Yeltsin in Russia, Shushkevich in Belarus, and Kravchuk in Ukraine. Belarus never wanted to be separated from Russia. So what I will say in my conclusion is that a historical injustice is about to be remedied.
Good stuff, Marcos and Tony. We have about a minute left. Your final thoughts, please.
Well, look, tomorrow here in Britain is a very important vote in the House of Commons. It's the renewal of the COVID-19 or Coronavirus Act, which, if it is renewed without changes, would allow another 6 months of draconian powers where the government themselves, including civil servants, will be able to rule the country by decree. So I just like to, I think that maybe this move by Raab is a way of sending out a message to MPs and opinion formers and politicians in Britain that, oh, this is a very real problem that we have with Belarus, and we are trying to show the strongman tactics. But my prediction is tomorrow that we may well find lots of changes to this coronavirus legislation, which will allow MPs here in Britain to actually scrutinise all that, and that actually what he's done is he's made a mess of it again, Dominic Raab. I think that the British government have made the wrong move here in trying to impose these economic warfare sanctions on Belarus because of trying to make impressions on their friends here in London. And let's just hope that the vote tomorrow it allows MPs to scrutinise what's happening, because he is accusing Belarus of being a dictatorship and that sort of thing. But actually, Britain is turning into a dictatorship where they're bypassing the House of Commons. And let's hope that all changes tomorrow.
All right, good stuff, gentlemen. Two great guys with a wealth of knowledge between the two of you. Always a pleasure to have you both on. Marcus Papadopoulos from London and Tony Gosling there from Bristol. And viewers, that's a wrap for this segment of your Press TV's News Review. Thank you for tuning in, and goodbye for now.